there are all kinds of people making life-changing amounts of money like me whose stories never get told.
Exactly.
And that's really a shame, because you don't have to be a Mark Zuckerberg to be an entrepreneur, or a Sarah Blakely. You can be a Sharon Gillenwater and, make all your retirement money and have a great retirement. You don't have to take venture capital. If everything that's being held up is all on the Zuckerberg Blakely end of the spectrum, I think it makes a lot of people quit before they even get started.
Welcome to It Gets Late Early. I am so excited about today's guest. She is really an incredible person, and I'm so fortunate to have met her. And I've met her through the beauty of social media. So social media isn't only just a terrible thing in our society. It can also bring people together. And it did that very thing for Sharon Gillenwater and me. Sharon is an exceptional human being. She actually co-founded a company that she went on to sell for $25 million. And she did it all without the use of VC, which is something that's unusual, I would say, in the tech industry. And she's just actually out there on a mission to democratize access to the knowledge that she wishes she had back when she was co-founding her company in the tech industry, bootstrapping it all herself, which I think is an amazing thing, particularly because very few women actually talk openly about money. It's almost seen as like uncouth to do so. So I have so much respect and admiration for you, Sharon, and I'm so happy you're here. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you. And thank you for that. I'm sure there are plenty of people who think of me as uncouth, but I don't care.
I love it. I love
Probably some people in my own family.
I think this is exactly the kind of information we need, and women just don't get it oftentimes. And to be clear, anything that you've said and you've written in your book, which I don't even know if I mentioned in that intro, you wrote this fantastic book that I'm now reading. I'm very fortunate to have gotten an early access look at it. But your book is full of information that can be used by people of any gender, any age, et cetera, to help them on their path. So what is the book that you've written that is so excellent, Sharon?
The book is called Scaling with Soul: How I Built and Sold a $25 million Tech Company Without Being an Asshole.
Oh, God, you guys, it's possible? Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
It is possible.
I didn't think so.
And it's not that hard to not be an asshole, but apparently it is for some very high profile people.
It seems that way. It almost seems like the Venn diagram of like complete narcissism and sociopathy, and like tech founders is like a full circle, right? Like it's all the way filled in. So it's very heartening to see someone who's actually done it the right way. And your story just really resonated with me. I've already blown through a quarter of the book in one morning, so which is saying something given how many things I have on my plate right now. So it's really excellent. And I just found myself feeling so much of your story, especially as a woman, and all the things that you've gone through in your life were really moving. And so I guess it would be great to just kick off with a little bit about you and your background.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. And, it's people are just starting to read it, so that's encouraging to hear, because I don't know what to expect. So the reason my mission is to democratize access to information about entrepreneurship and have people understand that they can do this is because I come from a non-traditional background. I don't have the background that you would expect a tech founder would have. I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't have connections and access to venture capitalists or even venture funded entrepreneurs. That whole ecosystem was not accessible to me. Even though I did, as you'll read in the book, raise venture capital once before for an earlier startup, and it actually killed the company. So part of it was that I didn't have access to that world, but also it was that because it killed my previous company, I decided I really didn't want to raise money if I didn't have to. And so that led me to this bootstrapping journey where I really learned a lot about the value of bootstrapping and how to do it well. And getting back to my background, I was the first in my family to go to college. My dad was a blue collar guy, and my mom was actually hired as one of the earliest computer operators by the US Navy as a civilian back in the 60s. And back then, computer work was considered women's work. It was considered clerical because they were, feeding these punch cards into these giant computers. But she had a lot of ongoing training throughout her career. And by the time she retired, she didn't go to college. She was working alongside people with master's degrees. So, that was my background. And there were a lot of other twists and turns in my background, like ending up in a private school, going to school alongside some very wealthy people. That turned me into a striver because I got a window into this world that I had never seen before. So it's a little bit of an unusual background, but definitely not not part of that Ivy League to Silicon Valley pipeline at all.
Right. That, Harvard, Stanford, GSB, et cetera, right? It's different. And I think that's what's so moving about your story. And one thing that stood out to me too is that you actually have a background in writing. And so it's nice to see you come full circle and be publishing this book, right? But tell me a little bit about what it was like actually getting into the tech industry and how you wound up in San Francisco in the Bay Area.
Well, I first came to San Francisco when I was about 13 years old as part of a performing arts tour, and I fell in love. I had never seen anything like that. I'd never traveled to Europe or anything or seen any kind of architecture besides Southern California ranch homes and Spanish style homes. So I was enchanted with San Francisco, and I decided at that time, like, I'm going to get up there someday. And it took me until I was 30. I got married to a man who also loved San Francisco and actually lived here for a few months. And so we just came on up after we got married, and we moved to San Francisco without jobs. And at that time in 1996, 95, it was the beginning of the internet boom. And tech was everywhere and startups were everywhere. And I took a job at a startup and he took a job at a startup. And it doesn't matter, if you think you're not interested in tech, which I didn't think I was, you just get sucked in if you live here.
Yeah.
And if you are halfway competent, they never want to let you go, particularly if you're working directly with the big tech companies like the Ciscos and at the time, Oracle and Sun and all of those. I worked for all of them as a contractor eventually. And that's how I came up with my idea for my second startup. There was another startup in there in the middle of all that. But I discovered rather than falling in love with tech, I fell in love with startups. I loved it because I like a fast pace. I like being able to have an immediate, significant impact. And you can do those things at startups. And so even though when I came to the city, I thought I wanted to work for like a Gap Inc. or, Levi's corporate, it just wasn't in the cards for me. The HR people did not respond well to me for some reason. And I just started working at a startup. I don't even remember how I heard about it, but I loved it. And I never looked back.
I'm a quarter of the way through your book, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that you described yourself as someone with a lot of insecurity and self-doubt. So how does one go from having those particular traits to getting the gumption to found a company?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I am quite fear-driven, not as much as I used to be, but I also have this determination and conviction when I feel like this is the right thing to do, this is going to work. And it just keeps me going. I can't even really explain it, but it's not a great combo for a person to have. It's not super comfortable to live in this. But
here you are.
Yeah. But, the more success I have, and I've had failures, of course, but I've also had successes, both big and small, and that keeps me going. And I think another thing that I've developed, which is very helpful, is the ability to just shut out naysayers depending on who they are. It's important when you start something to listen to all kinds of stakeholders about what they think about what you're doing. And you'll get a lot of mixed feedback. Everything from, the industry you're trying to break into to, VCs, other entrepreneurs, family, and customers. And there were a lot of naysayers when I started, but the customers loved what I was doing. And so that kept me going. And, I also have a very supportive husband. And so that kept me going. He always believed in me more than I believed in myself. So, you just have this whole toolkit full of stuff, some of it positive, some of it negative. And I think the more experience you have, you can pick and choose what you're going to pay attention to that day in that toolkit, and try to put a lot of that negative stuff on the back burner.
I love that. I think that you're absolutely right. In my own personal experience, I can say that I've gotten better over time at sort of filtering through that sort of self-talk, right? And negativity and focusing in on what I can do, what I can push through, right? And that has been something that, wasn't necessarily something that was innate for me. In fact, it was very much the same as you just described, right? And so I'm very happy that over time that has started to shift a little bit. It's not perfect, but we're working on it.
I did do some coaching that was kind of life-changing for me, and that I would recommend to anybody who has that negative self-talk in particular. That just can really do you in. And I thought it sounded like a little touchy and feely and weird.
Woo-woo.
Because I went to this coach, and basically, she's a good friend of mine now, actually. I went to her and I'm like, I just want to get to, this was back in the early 2000s, and I was consulting in tech. And I was like, I just have this imposter syndrome because I'm new to tech and I'm afraid everyone knows I don't know what I'm doing. And I said, and I also want to get to 15 grand a month in income from my tech consulting. And she started asking me about my background, and I'm like, what does this have to do with anything? And we went through a process where I realized it was limiting beliefs that was really holding me back. And she actually took me through a physical exercise of like throwing them off, which I thought was the weirdest thing. And I thought, this isn't going to work, but it did. It totally worked.
Wow.
So that was a real game changer and worth the whatever I paid her to coach me for several months. So I'd encourage people to check it out. It sounds strange, but it works.
That does. Hey, whatever works, right? And it seems like it very much did work for you, which is fantastic. And you also mentioned in the book, and this actually made me laugh out loud, you were talking about how you were in, it was the 90s in the Bay Area. You were going to these panel events with tech experts, right? And you saw people up there talking and pontificating about certain subjects and then kind of looking, just take us through what you saw and how that sort of planted a seed in you that you too could go and be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean, it was such an exciting time, and we were all trying to figure out what this internet thing was all about. And at the time, it was all, this was pre-Google. It makes me sound really old, but it was all about portals. They called them portals to the internet. So you had Yahoo was a big one. You had Netscape. You had AOL. These were all kind of landing pages with search features that you could use to explore the web. And I was working as a salesperson in the localization industry. So global businesses needed to translate their websites into multiple languages, or software companies need to translate their user interfaces. So I was in that business. And so I knew all of these portals had so much money and they were expanding. So I went to a panel called The Future of the Internet or something about portals. And I'm sitting there and I start to hear someone says portholes. and I'm thinking, oh no, I've been saying portals, it's portholes. Oh no, I'm making an idiot of myself this whole time. And so then you see someone else looking around, suddenly starting to say portholes. And then there are people who seem like they're trying to find the middle ground in the word between portholes and portals, so no one will know if they don't know what it is. And it was hilarious. Like, you had a panel of experts talking about portals, and after a few minutes, they were all saying portholes.
Oh,
And
that's so
so,
funny.
first of all, I couldn't stay in the room because I was laughing so hard. I had to leave. And then I thought about it, and I thought, if the experts don't even know what it's called, like, maybe I'm not too far behind here, and I can make a go of it. And it was shortly after that I started my first startup with the encouragement and also some seed funding from my sister-in-law, who was kind of my entrepreneurial mentor. And I was off and running.
There seems to me to be a lot of sense that if you aren't technical, it's hard to found a tech-based company. And what I love about your story is that you didn't have a technical background. You were just around all these people in the Bay Area, and you kind of learned by osmosis, and you recognized that you too could do it. Love to hear more about that, because I do feel like that's still a persistent thought. I know myself, I even think sometimes, well, do I really work in tech if I don't do the tech? And I feel like there's almost this element of people looking down on those who aren't technical, which I think is ridiculous, because I'd love to see a technical co-founder go try and sell their product to a client and see how that goes, or forge a partnership and see how that goes, right? Like, we all have our specific area of expertise.
Well, it was a bit intimidating and challenging, but you can hire people to do all that. And I would argue, even back then, but especially today, I feel like it's an advantage to be non-technical, because you have to be selling and marketing whatever it is, your app probably, to a bunch of other non-technical people. You have to understand and be intimately familiar with and be able to describe the use cases and frame it in a way that appeals to non-technical people. I don't know if you've ever had a sales conversation and been on the other end of that sales conversation with a technical founder who's trying to tell you how great their product is. It's painful sometimes. I've had those. And so I think we're actually at an advantage in a lot of ways. I mean, it is frustrating not being able to build everything yourself. But actually now, I mean, I'm not building anything right now, but I just got off the phone with one of my coaching clients, and she's building her own app, and she's not technical. So there are all these low-code, no-code tools. And even if you aren't able to take advantage of those, there are phenomenal firms out there that you can work with. They're hard to find, but we eventually found one, my partner and I. My partner was also non-technical. And we did struggle working with kind of a series of developers that, you know, they might be able to be good at one thing, but they weren't the whole package. We eventually found a firm and worked with them the last 4 years of our business. And they were a perfect technical partner for us, because not only were they able to build against our vision, but they understood our business, because we worked with them for 4 years, and they had the people that they had as our contacts. They had tremendous business acumen, and that's really important, because you can give someone instructions of exactly what to build, but if they don't understand your business, if they don't have some baseline understanding of it, you're going to get something back and say, wait a minute, why on earth would you do this? That it reveals that they don't understand what you're doing. And that makes it hard to work together. So, you know, I would manage to do it, but there were a lot of painful episodes throughout both of those startups because I was non-technical. For example, when I created the Boardroom Insiders 1.0, the first version of the database, I hired a team out of India, just 2 guys who are moonlighting. And it was an awful experience. Couldn't have been worse. And we were cleaning up our code for the rest of time until we eventually replatformed our whole site. And, and when you're non-technical, then your new developer who you're working with, anything that gets screwed up, they can blame it on the old code. And that's what they do. They're like, well, that old code from those guys in India. And I was literally hearing that like 10 years later. and so it was great when we got to just do a rip and replace and just tear it all down and rebuild it in a modern programming language. And then that all went away. And so it worked out.
And what was it like being a woman founding a company back then in that sort of hotbed of activity in Silicon Valley in the Bay Area?
Yeah, it was, as you'd expect, nobody takes you seriously and just pats you on the head. And
that's cute. Good luck.
Yeah, that's cute. Very seldom any other women in the room. I mean, both of my companies were content companies. And so you always have women in content, but you don't have women in the funding arena or the banking arena or the lawyering arena. So you're surrounded by a lot of men. And I think you'll see, well, you've probably already seen from where you are in the book that I worked early in my career with a lot of women. Women were in charge. So it was new to me. And, but when you're a woman in the 80s, growing up in the 80s, you're just kind of used to a lot of pretty bad behavior that hopefully wouldn't fly now. I don't know. I don't know if things are getting better or worse, but I got used to it, and I'm very practical about it. There's an episode in the book where I kind of take my mom to task because I think she should be standing up to my dad who is not treating her well. And young women now will ask me the same question when I tell my stories about being treated badly in the workplace. I see that connection. And in the book, my mom's like, it's not even worth going there. It's going to blow over. That's how I often felt in the workplace or in all the different circles I had to run in to run these tech companies. It's like somebody does something obnoxious or says something offensive, or somebody parrots an idea that you had a week ago and voiced and no one paid any attention, and now everyone thinks it's great. But you go along to get along because, do you want to fight or do you want a successful company? And if I think in the situation I was in, being able to fight would have been an enormous privilege. I mean, I didn't have money. I didn't have, resources in terms of people or connections. So I had to do it with what I had. And that was the most important thing to me. It wasn't important to me to be right or righteous. I just wanted to get what I needed to get this company going and being successful.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because you said you've had both experiences. You've had the VC traditional path, which didn't go well, and then you decided to do it an alternative way the second time.
So the first one, fidget.com, that was an email newsletter site. Email newsletters were a big thing in the
They're a big thing
90s.
Now.
They are now.
Like,
they've kind of come back.
Yeah.
And I actually think if I hadn't taken the money, I could have bootstrapped that company to some kind of exit. I know I could have. It was really lean. But especially when you're doing your first startup, you get exhausted. And you don't see an end in sight. Like you're doing, recruiting, you're doing content, you're doing accounting, you're doing tech, you're doing everything.
So much.
And so many of the things you may not have any expertise in. And so it's stressful. And then you're learning things like affiliate marketing, which was new at the time. And you're trying to figure out how that works and use all the platforms. So I was exhausted. And we had an opportunity in April of 2000 to raise $3 million from an incubator that came after us. And the market was already crashing in April 2000. The NASDAQ was crashing already. And so we thought it was amazing that we were able to raise this money at that time. And so we took it, but it was for a majority stake in the company because we're an incubator. And what that means is they would take over your accounting, your legal, your HR, all of that stuff that you don't really want to do.
Sounded like a dream, right? You're like,
it did. It's,
right?
It's like all the stuff that I don't know how to do, but I've been having to do, like just take it, right? But it made it that much easier for them to shut us down, which is what they did, because when the crash was more prolonged and worse than everybody expected, that firm decided they were going to pivot to biotech. They were a content, primarily focused on content investments, and they had a bunch of people working there who had created Disney's first online presence. And so, they were focused on content and entertainment. And when they fired their CEO and got a new CEO to focus on biotech, the MO there was to just threaten and weasel their way out of the funding commitments that they had made. And so what we found out later is they never fully put that $3 million in our account, which deprived us of interest. They just put $1 million in, and then when they decided to shut us down, they had the majority of board seats, so they just got us on the phone, called a vote without even saying anything else, shut us down, process server at the door, suing us for fraud.
Whoa.
Which was hilarious, because to think that I'm going to defraud money people, like, that's just ridiculous. I didn't know anything. Jeez. I didn't know enough to defraud anyone. No. And so they were just being nasty and they wanted out of it. So we did settle. And then I had to spend the next 4 months shutting the company down, which was heartbreaking.
That sounds so tough.
And I had to shut it down because when you raise money, especially back in those days, they want you to spend it. They want you to scale. They want you to hire people. So we had hired people. We had, taken out a year lease on an office. We signed a year server hosting contract, all these things. So the only way I could get out of those commitments, those financial commitments, was to basically shut the company down and negotiate with the vendors, which, by the way, everyone was doing at the time. Everybody was going out of business and, negotiating. So it was not a unique thing. So it was a kind of traumatic experience.
Yeah, it sounds it. Oh my gosh.
Then I went off and, I had kids and I did a couple of other things and the worst job I've ever had, which you'll get to that. That's a good chapter. Yeah. And then after the worst job I've ever had, I decided I'm never working for anyone again. And I got pulled into tech marketing by a guy who used to work for me at this first startup that I worked at when I was in the city. And he just pulled me into tech marketing consulting, and we became this dynamic duo working for all the big tech companies as contractors through his agencies that he worked for. And that's where I started to see that tech companies were facing a big challenge in that their deals were getting so big and so consequential for, traditional companies like a Procter & Gamble, for example, that suddenly that they were attracting the scrutiny of the C-suite at the Procter & Gambles of the world. They were like, wait a minute, what is this we're deploying, and how is this going to impact our workflows, and why does it cost, 8 or 9 figures? And so the sales game for tech companies was beginning to shift from talking about, hardware and software to talking about business impact. Because if you're going to go into the C-suite and have a conversation about what they're investing in, you better be able to say, it's going to, allow you to launch products faster, or it's going to save you money this way, or it's going to increase your revenue, right? So salespeople in tech were not trained to have those conversations, and they were not equipped to have those conversations with insight about the companies and the executives who they needed to talk to. So I started creating a methodology and a template for these executive dossiers and started testing them with my tech customers, and they loved it. And I quickly realized, well, everyone in Silicon Valley is chasing the same 2,500 executives, mostly in the Fortune 500. And if I could get these profiles completed in a database and keep them updated, I could sell subscriptions to the database, and I could just sit in my pajamas and the money would roll in. It wasn't quite that easy, but and one of the things that I was thinking is I am not raising venture capital for this because I don't want to go through that again. And that didn't mean I didn't talk to people. I talked to quite a few VCs at the time, and they all told me, like, this is not an attractive opportunity for us because it's not a big enough market. It doesn't scale well because you have to have human beings with tremendous business acumen producing the content. And so I knew that it just wasn't going to work, and that if I was going to pull it off, I was going to have to bootstrap it or find some angel money. So I did both of those things.
That's awesome. And it's funny that you say it wasn't attractive enough because the TAM wasn't there. And it's like, gosh, it's so funny to consider what TAM is interesting to a venture capital firm, right? Versus like the average, like a $25 million sale is pretty solid. Like I'm into that, right? And a VC would be like, not enough, right? But it's wild. But I'm glad that you decided to pursue an alternative path and that you saw that there was a big enough need in the marketplace. I think, so often we don't serve the need. We don't solve the problem. Like that's the most critical element of all of this. And I think we get caught up in all this other stuff. But you saw firsthand that this was necessary and went and did it, which I think is awesome. I'd love to understand a little bit more about what it was like for you at this point in your life doing something this big. Because at this point, you're in your 40s, right? You're a mother. And your plate is full, right?
It was scary. It was scary. I had the 2 little kids, and my husband, his career had kind of imploded because he was in kind of online advertising space, and he made his business in the early days of the internet, and then everything changed, and he was taking care of the kids and it was no longer relevant, right? So I kept consulting. My consulting business was going gangbusters, so I kept consulting for the first 6 years that I had the company, and not always full speed ahead with that, but I was always doing some consulting because I had to keep some money coming in the door. It paid well. I could do it with my eyes closed. It had become somewhat easy for me. And it kept me embedded with the very people who needed the product that I was building. And that's critical. And a lot of times people will ask me, well, how do you come up with an idea to build a company around? It's like, well, presumably you're working in a field, or you've been working in a field for a long time like I was, and you start to see the same thing that comes up over and over, the thing that trips people up, that drives them crazy, that they complain about. And if you keep your eyes and ears open, you'll hear that over and over again with various things, and you might see an opportunity to build a product or a business around solving one of those problems. And then I always urge people, especially if they want to bootstrap and they don't want to raise money, keep that day job for as long as you possibly can, because it will allow you to, don't do anything unethical. I'm not saying to do that, but it will allow you to keep your finger on the pulse of that market and understand what they need. And if you are able, if people are open, if you're able to be open about what you're doing, you can even test out your product with your peers and people in your industry because you're still in it. And that's in contrast to a lot of the Silicon or Ivy League to Silicon Valley people who they're just looking for an idea. They may not have worked in that industry. They're just looking for like the next, $1 billion idea. And there can be a lot of arrogance in that world, and they may be building something that nobody really wants or needs,
Yes.
And in that world, sometimes that's okay, because if they just build it really, really fast and get it big fast and sell it to a bunch of other venture funded startups, which I've seen happen. And so, they're all using each other's stuff, and they can build it up and they can sell it and they can make their money and get out. And then a lot of times those businesses actually go away. I've seen it happen. It's almost like a house of cards.
Yeah.
But I wanted to build something real that customers loved and that solved this problem of kind of C-suite selling and engagement in tech. And so that's what I set out to do. And it was really helpful staying in that consulting world while I was doing it, and allowed me to sustain myself. But, you take on a lot of custom work in those early years because you need money coming in the door. And especially in tech marketing, everybody wants something different. Everyone wants something customized or, bespoke. So you end up doing a lot of that. And you do it because you don't have money and you need that money coming in. But at some point, when you get on pretty solid ground, you need to wean yourself off that and really move towards the ARR model, because that's what you're going to sell on, right? So that's what we did over the period of about 14 years.
Wow. That's awesome. And you did all of it somehow without being a total asshole. So thank you for that. Like, let's get more people like you sharing out there. What were the sorts of things that you did that that other founders should take note of to keep a happy employee base and people working for you? Because it sounds like you made sure by the end of everything, and when you sold the company, that your people were taken care of.
Yeah, well, I think tech and, other industries too tend to view people as disposable. And my partner and I never came at it that way. We, you start out being very careful when you hire because you don't have money. But then after a while, you're like, well, we need to make sure that we never have to do layoffs, because that wouldn't be nice for people, right? We care about these people. And then also, if you're bootstrapping, you are probably not in the 95th percentile of salary offers, right? You're probably in about the 50% percentile. And so you're not able to hire people who know exactly the job that you're hiring them to do, right? You do a lot of, you don't recruit talent, you develop talent when you're a bootstrapper. And what was unexpected to me is how much I loved doing that, and how much I loved seeing people grow and learn and thrive in their roles, and then eventually become leaders in the company. And that happened over and over again. But I think it happened because we had to train and nurture every single person we hired, with, rare exceptions. We hired mainly people in their 20s, some right out of school, and they needed mentoring and training. And you get to know somebody and you get to know what motivates them and you like them. And so you don't see them as disposable, and you want them to succeed. And you start out saying, I need this person to succeed because it's going to be a real pain in the ass if I have to go out and hire someone else, right? But once you get to know the person, it's more about, I want this person to succeed because I adore this person, right? I'm going to make them successful no matter what it takes. And so you just start absorbing that into your culture. It does become part of your culture. And when you do it, everyone below you does it. And so it just becomes a very lovely situation,
I mean, it sounds ideal.
It is. It's ideal. It's not that hard to do, by the way,
God.
And it's fun. And
wish more people were like that.
It's fun. It's rewarding. So contrast that with, I've talked to plenty of startup founders, especially when we were struggling with figuring out our sales model and what our sales team was going to look like. Just hire 30 salespeople. In 3 months, half of them will be gone. In 6 months, another half of that will be gone. And you'll end up with 5 good ones. No, I'm not doing that.
That's such a typical method. Yeah.
Yeah, it's typical, and that's what they do with all kinds of roles. So that's why you get these huge waves. You get these waves of people being hired in, and then you have the mass layoffs, and
Hmm.
without really giving people good reason, as we've seen in all these layoff videos, right? So they do think of people as being disposable. That's kind of their people strategy in some cases, particularly around sales, because it's really easy to get rid of those folks if they're not performing. You have, a cause right there. So we never did it that way. And what I learned is you get much better results when you don't do it that way, because you build loyalty and people who really, really care about the company. They care about the customers. They care about each other. And it just creates a very nice culture that people want to work in.
So, Sharon, do you think that there are a lot of companies like yours that you just described where people actually do care about the people in their organization and we just don't hear about them as much? Or do you think this really is just a completely pernicious problem in the tech industry where you have a lot of people who are, I would guess, probably on the narcissistic side of the scale, right, at the helm of these companies who do feel that the people who work for them are, plebeians who they can just dispose of?
I think there are probably more people like me out there,
Good.
but the
Please.
the other people are louder because they
Mhm.
probably do want to have, like, a big profile and be admired and talked about. But since my videos blew up on TikTok, I've been talking to so many entrepreneurs, both men and women, and every single one of them is more like me than like them. People, one
Thank
of the
God.
most popular topics that people come to me and want to know about is the phantom equity plan that we set up for our employees, where they got essentially a bonus when we sold. And it's, you don't have to do it, but it's a nice thing to do. And so many entrepreneurs are coming to me saying, how do I do that? I want to
Oh,
do that.
wow. That's so
And
uplifting.
yeah, so they want to do right by their employees who help them build the business. And also, another topic that people want to talk about is how do you reward employees creatively when you are a bootstrapper and you can't pay the
Great
top
question.
salaries, right? So that's another popular topic. So I see it every day how entrepreneurs do care and do want to create a great culture. But, if you go on Twitter or even walk around San Francisco, you see a lot of the bad actors, right, who say very cynical things about employees and probably don't create the greatest workplaces to work at.
Yeah, it makes me think of the quote of Jeff Bezos essentially saying that he wants his employees to wake up with their sheets drenched in sweat because they're so terrified about working there. It's just like, how are these the people who are like having outsized influence on our world? That's just so disturbing. So I'm
Yeah.
very heartened to hear that you are uncovering a side of the internet and the side of society that actually has people who want to do the right thing and want to reward and employ great people. So I think let's shift into a little bit about that, about what you're doing today, because you are doing all this wonderful content creation. That's, where we first met was really on Threads. And then I started to view your TikTok videos and I was inspired by what your mission is, because I really think we need this voice, your voice specifically out there educating.
So I put out several videos a week talking about various aspects of entrepreneurship and managing people and raising money and all of those things. And the only reason I started doing it was because I had written this book and I couldn't sell it anywhere. And the reason why it kept getting rejected, people would say things like, "Oh, this is interesting, but you have no platform." I mean, I had pulled myself off of social a few years ago because I found it so toxic. And so I didn't have a platform besides, a few hundred folks on LinkedIn. And so I was really depressed about it. I didn't know what to do. And then I talked to this coach. I was a member of Chief at the time. And there was a coach there called Elizabeth Pearson who had written a book. And the first time I met her, I just said, yeah, I'm just like kind of stuck and I don't know what to do. And she said, get off. She said, don't go to the regular publishers. Publishing is dead. Do a hybrid publishing deal. You can afford it. You just made all this money. Pay to have your book published. You'll own 100% of it. It's going to be great. And then she's like, and get on TikTok. I was like, what? Because I thought TikTok was just for silly stuff. And I said, Dancing. Is there business content on TikTok? And she said, yes. And she said, it's easy to build an audience because it's kind of open right now. And so I started posting videos, and at first I was getting followers and it was going well and getting good feedback. And then my older son talked me into making a video where I revealed exactly how much money I made from the sale and how much I walked away with after all the fees and taxes. And it was terrifying to do that, for the reasons you mentioned earlier. People think it's gauche, people, come after you. And so I had a lot of sleepless nights, but I made the video and then I put it out and it went super viral. And I didn't even know it was happening. I was out on a hike and, thousands of people were
Your phone's
following
pinging.
me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, so it went viral, and then I wasn't posting on Twitter, but somebody put it on Twitter. I don't know why I didn't realize, even though I don't post it on Twitter, it's going to end up on Twitter anyway. And so then it went super viral there. And I'd like to just explain what happened with that video, even though it's a little sidetrack, because it's important for your audience to know, for entrepreneurs to know. All these venture capitalists started sharing it on Twitter, and well-funded entrepreneurs, like people who would have never given me the time of day before. And they were holding me up as some example of some kind of genius, how I engineered my exit. Well, it was all just kind of an accident, because what I didn't know, which they knew, was that you can raise 50 million and sell for 200 million. And if you're the founder, you're probably going to walk away with less than I did. And I had no idea that that was the case. And that's why it went so viral, because I guess founders don't often realize what they're getting into when they raise this funding and how much they're actually giving it away. Because a founder will say, okay, so my VC has X percentage, but there are all kinds of other deal terms that will enable them to expand that percentage. And one woman said in a comment, she's a VC, and she said, what people don't realize is that founding teams, not just a single founder, but the founding team together will have less than 10% when they're done raising their money. And so I've been taking this all in, going, God, I didn't even really know this. I've already been putting out this content on TikTok, and even I didn't know. And so I want to create a culture where people will share the information. And I was talking to my ex-business partner recently, and we were discussing another exit where we found out it was like a $175 million exit, and one of the founders walked away with like $2.5 million. Way less than I got, right?
Yep.
But the thing about it is there's an opportunity cost for bootstrappers. You're not getting paid market rate salaries the whole time you're running the company, which means you're not saving for retirement. Mm-hmm. And when, I was in my 50s for most of that time. And so that was terrifying. And so you're not investing in things like the stock market. So VC funded entrepreneurs, even though they're going to walk away with a lot less, they do have a lot of wealth building opportunities along their journey that bootstrappers typically don't have. And they have prestige, because when you're part of a high profile, sexy exit, where it's above 100 million, everyone wants to, to have you as part of their team later. I mean, no one's coming to me and asking me to be part of their team, because nobody knows who I am, right? But
that's about to change.
If you've been in that kind of well publicized exit world, and you're one of the senior execs there or one of the founders, you're going to have a lot more opportunities down the road. So it's just, there are a lot of trade-offs, but it's just a really interesting thing that I think a lot of people didn't realize, including me, before I put that video out there.
Wow. No, I certainly didn't realize that either. I mean, I knew about dilution, of course, but the stark reality that you just laid bare there is crazy. I never would have imagined it would have been erased to such a sliver, and even in comparison to what you were able to achieve, right? It's really wild. And I think, like you said, this information is really valuable, and it's not really anywhere until now, and that's thanks to you. So I think it's really good that you're continuing on this effort. And not only that, I would say, especially for women, I mean, I didn't have anyone telling me I could be an entrepreneur back when I was in college, right? And I think with the whole kind of girl boss movement, that's changed a bit, but specifically in tech, especially, it's like, I don't think there are that many people out there talking plainly about entrepreneurship to women and to other underrepresented founders. And so I think it's a really critical conversation, and breaking down just like the bare bones, here's how you do it. Here's my advice to you. Here's what I learned. Here's where I failed. Here's where I succeeded. All of that is critically valuable information. So I think it's super cool what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a lot of fun too. And there's a lot of gatekeeping in the entrepreneurial world and the VC world, just the jargon that's used.
Oh, gosh, yes.
You know, even talking about a deal, like the deal that I did to sell my company. It's not easy, but it's not that complicated. Like, you don't have to be an expert to do it. You can make it through, and you can learn what to do to facilitate that deal and get the best outcome for yourself.
Yeah.
Just by talking to people. But the people have to be willing to share. I mean, I was lucky that I had quite a few, all men, helping me through that, who had done it before and who were not assholes and who were, you know, I mean, my partner was a banker, right? So he, when what sparked the sale of our company was, you know, we had been contacted by PE firms for a couple of years. And one day I was sitting with him back in South Carolina. I got a call from a PE firm that we had talked to a couple times. And the guy said, so, you know, how's it going out there? And I said, well, we're just keeping our heads down. Everything's great. We're growing really fast this year. We've doubled in size, blah, blah, blah. And I said, so I think we're just going to keep our heads down and run the business. We're not really looking to sell. And he said, oh, that's too bad, because I could give you a $48 million term sheet tomorrow. And I was like, So I had never heard a number before. And when you're running something like that, you don't know what it's worth. Multiples are all over the place for SaaS, right? At the time, multiples were very, very high. So we were kind of like, maybe we should go for this now, because there's always going to be a crash. And so I ran out in the hallway and called my angel investor, who's done many of these deals. He told me that the PE guys were full of shit, that, you know, I would never get 48 million because they would just find all the sorts of reasons to, you know, reduce that once we got in due diligence. And he said, you need, if you're really thinking of selling, you need to hire an M&A banker. So I ran into my partner's office. What does that mean? Run a process. What's an M&A banker? And, you know, he's the kind of guy, he loves, you know, educating people who need information. So he's like, okay, he's like, it's like hiring a realtor for your business. It's no different than that. It's just more money, but it's not that complicated. And then he said to me, you know, you have the most to gain or lose from this whole process, so you need to run it. So that's how I ended up running it, when I had no idea on day one what it even meant, but I did it. And so that's it. And I was able to do it because people who were not assholes freely shared information with me. And so now I'm trying to do the same for other people. Because it's really important, because this is your financial security, your financial future. It's the well-being of your employees. There's just a lot at stake. And if you play it right, you can facilitate great outcomes for everybody.
That's awesome. Do you think that being a bit of an older founder gave you an edge in any way?
I think so. It sounds strange, but I feel like the older I get, the more fortitude I have for certain things, because you have perspective and you know that you can make it through almost anything. And you also know, like, it's like that worst job I ever had. That gave me so much determination to never have to go back and work a job like that again.
Yes.
And so I just really valued having the control and the opportunity to execute on a vision that I had. I found it really fun. And you just have a lot more perspective and stamina, I think. That's what I felt. And data shows that older founders succeed at higher rates, and that's something that is not in the profiles of founders that we see and hear about. And the media's really got it all wrong with they're elevating the bad behavior. You only hear the stories about these multi-million dollar exits, which we've since found out the founders may not really be doing as well as you think.
Mm-mm.
Whereas, there are all kinds of people making life-changing amounts of money, like me, whose stories never get told.
Exactly.
And that's really a shame, because you don't have to be a Mark Zuckerberg to be an entrepreneur, or a Sarah Blakely. You can be a Sharon Gillenwater and, make all your retirement money and have a great retirement. You don't have to take venture capital. And if everything that's being held up is all on the Zuckerberg Blakely end of the spectrum, I think it makes a lot of people quit before they even get started, because they're like, I could never do that. That's like a needle in a haystack. But you can do what I did, and lots of people do, but you just don't really hear about it.
God, that is so motivating. I love that. Like, I want to replay that in a loop. It's really important. And I think, fusing that with the fact that people are more successful, founders over 40 or 45 are actually more successful. They're the top percentage of success out there. I mean, the data is not going to lie about that. And so we need to understand and lay bare that there are other opportunities to achieve versus those, very hallmark sort of standard, well-known names that we all hear about. And I think what you have done and the life that you've architected for yourself it sounds to be a little bit more achievable than most people think, right? And I mean, It took a lot of hard work and determination, and you had to take a lot of risk, but you did it, and other people can too. Which leads me to what you're also doing now, which is coaching, right? So you're coaching entrepreneurs. Tell us a little bit about the people you coach.
Amazing entrepreneurs who I can't even believe they come to me for help, because they seem to know what they're doing to me. But I am coaching a few people who, this one who I just got off the phone with, so it's top of mind. She has sold multiple content businesses. And that's the other thing. You also don't have to have a 25 million exit to do great. I mean, there are people who are building agencies, content businesses, communities, marketplaces, and also very limited in scope SaaS products. And they're building, and then they're selling, and then they're building another one, and they're selling it. And these might only be like 6-figure exits or low 7-figure exits, but they do it multiple times. And it's almost like they enjoy the building phase, and then they want to move on and build something else. So I find that super interesting.
Also not discussed much, right?
Not discussed at all. And so this woman, I'll mention her name because I think this is a great resource for founders. Her name's Alexis Grant, and she has a company called They Got Acquired. And I got in touch with her. Well, she got in touch with me because she saw my video, and she's like, we are collecting data about these exits that don't get publicized or don't get, no information gets out there. And we're doing it to support founders who want to sell, so they can kind of benchmark what companies are selling for.
That's great.
And they're also doing it for the M&A bankers. And she has data on like 1,500 or so deals just like mine. And when you get that critical mass of data, you start to see real trends that can help founders figure out their valuations and can help buyers figure out what they should be offering. Because it's really been like a shot in the dark for companies like ours, right? It's basically worth whatever someone's willing to pay. And when you go into negotiation, you don't really, if you want a counter offer, you don't really have anything to base it on, you know?
No, that's really
So
tough.
she's collecting this data, and I think she's going to do phenomenally well. Because nobody else has that. And there's so many parallels to my business, because what we were collecting, nobody else had all that stuff in one place. And I love businesses like that. And then I'm coaching another woman who's, I love this story too. Her dad started this tech company. It's so techy, like I don't even understand what they do. It's like extra tech for the most tech. And
Supersized tech.
Yeah, I don't even know what it is, but anyway, apparently like all the techies love it, and it's not a big brand or anything like that. It's just something that's like a must-have little add-on, and they release new versions and updates all the time. And so her dad started this business. This man started this business, and his daughter, she's probably in her early 30s, and she was working in like marketing and branding or something, and really started learning more about her dad's business. And then she's like, you've got like a real company here. And so he was kind of looking for a partner or someone to help shoulder the load of running the business. So she's now working for the business. She's overhauled the pricing model and the business model. And she and I talked yesterday about like the phantom equity plan. We've talked a few times, and on the last call, her dad joined us. So it was great to be able to meet him.
Cool.
So they're just really amazing entrepreneurs out there, and they want to do right by their customers, by their teams, by each other. And I'm convinced there are more of those folks out there than the bad actors that we see. But, and that's why it was important to me to put asshole in the title of my book, because, in San Francisco, if you say you're a tech founder, people are like, in non-tech circles, people think like, we're sick of these guys. They come in and they act like jerks and take up all the restaurant reservations and throw their money around, and then we get a bust and then they leave. And I've seen 3 waves of that since I've lived in San Francisco, and people here who do not work in tech just don't have a great impression of people who do. And so I think that needs to be changed.
Yeah, we got to break the mold. I absolutely love what you're doing. I think it's really necessary, and that you're going to make some huge waves out there in the industry and beyond. So I'm sure my audience is going to want to learn more about you and read your book, of course. So where can they do that?
So SharonGillenwater.com is like the hub for all my social content. And my book is going to be selling on Amazon starting May 30th. So as we tape this, just a few more days.
So exciting. And like I said, I love it. I am so enthralled by it. I can't wait to finish it.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.